Tell Us How to Make It Better is partnering with the Readiness Lab, the home for podcasts, webinars, and training in the field of emergency and disaster services.
You know, the cost of disasters, the intensity of disasters, the continued cycle of disasters that we've been in for the past probably 20 years. At some point, it becomes unsustainable, right? You know, when is that next disaster that's so big that we can't write, the federal government, they can't write the check for it.
I'm George Siegel, and this is the Tell Us How to Make It Better podcast. Every week, we introduce you to people who are working on real-world problems and providing actual solutions. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me on today's Tell Us How to Make It Better podcast. If you've listened to any of the podcasts, or if you've seen my documentary film, The Last House Standing, you know that I'm very big on people understanding the risks of where they live and what could happen in terms of major disasters, because it's a life-altering experience that many people never recover from. So when I can have a guest on that is an expert in the field, I think it makes for a great show. My guest today is Pete Gaynor. Pete is the Senior Vice President and Director, National Resilience, Response and Recovery Programs for the LERO Group, and is the former FEMA administrator and acting Secretary of Homeland Security during the last presidential administration. During his time at FEMA, Pete led the agency's response to more than 300 presidentially declared emergencies and major disasters. And during the historic year of 2020, he oversaw FEMA's first ever operational response to a nationwide pandemic, while simultaneously responding to a record number of disasters. As a member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force, Pete directed FEMA's operational coordination of the whole of government response to COVID-19. Pete, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks, George. It's good to be here.
That's a lot. You were in some tumultuous situations. Before we get into the reason I had you on, what was that all like for you, being caught up in all that stuff?
Yeah, it's I'm not sure how it all happened. I think it's just like maybe the wrong place, wrong time, or right place, right time. It depends how you look at it. Yeah, it's unplanned. I think I went down to help my friend Brock be the deputy, and then some things changed, and then COVID hit, and we had probably two of the worst fire seasons, hurricane seasons in history on top of that. And it's a you're in a special place. The nation's asking you to do, not just me, but the entire FEMA organization. They're asking you to do impossible things, and somehow, through really hard work and really great people, you rise up and you do it. And so it was an honor to be down there to help the nation through that early pandemic.
Yeah, I imagine it's very difficult to be in a job where you're criticized for everything. And when FEMA is involved, I made a documentary film called The Last House Standing, and we featured Brock Long in the film.
Yeah.
FEMA is in such a thankless position going into a disaster because people are devastated. Their lives are turned upside down. And if it goes, there's no really going well. I mean, it just seems like a thankless job.
Yeah. So I tell people, and so I've been a local emergency manager and a state emergency manager and a federal emergency manager. And, FEMA or whatever state or local you work in, it's the only agency that has emergency in its title, right? So it's not going to be, it's not going to be good. And that's kind of our forte, right? When disaster happens, we stand up and we do what we're tasked to do, and that's bring relief to disaster survivors. These days, from pandemic to hurricanes to you name it, right? We're in that mix. And so from time to time, it can be a thankless job because everyone wants it perfect, and disasters and chaos, and this business is an imperfect business. But you do your best, and I've told this to other people. I'll match any one bad story with 10,000 great stories about what FEMA or emergency management has done to help those that are in need, those disaster survivors. So yeah, you have to have a really, really thick skin. One of the things I did in DC, never listen to media because you'll go crazy. And I think sometimes it may prevent you from doing the right thing when you listen to what they're saying. and it just gets you off track. So, stick to your morals, stick to your integrity, do the right thing, and hopefully it all comes out with a plus sign.
Yeah, I think the media naturally just looks for the bad stories.
Yeah.
They very rarely gravitate towards the good ones. When I used to go around talking about the media to groups, I would say, if you have a nice family of 5 or 6 people living in a house and everybody's, they go to church, they do their jobs, they're A students, nobody cares. But all of a sudden dad gets caught with a hooker, mom is drunk driving, the kids set fire to something. It's the lead story of the news.
Yeah.
We want to see bad things happen.
Yeah. So, and that's probably human nature, right? I guess maybe we take pleasure in somebody else's misery. I don't really get that. Being in the misery business, right? You want to kind of relieve all that. And so, just the ground floor of all this is, the FEMA administrator travels a lot, right? To and from disasters, all on, for the most part, all on commercial airlines. And so I did a lot of traveling across the country from disaster to disaster. And, typically I'm wearing my FEMA gear, my FEMA shirt, and they don't really know who you are. But in an airport, I've had dozens of people come up to me just randomly, right? And just and they're not thanking me personally, but they're thanking FEMA for everything that they've done for a brother or sister or cousins in some previous disaster. I've never had anyone come up to me and say, you guys do a terrible job. I think 100% of the interaction that I've had is people that really appreciate FEMA or emergency managers doing the thing that not many people want to do or can do.
That's great. And that's so important. It's great to hear that. Now, what I like to do with this podcast, one of the reasons I started it is we identify problems and we talk about people that are solving them. And I think that's so huge, rather than just complaining about things, to actually make a difference. So what would you say is the primary issue or problem that you work on?
I mean, now
in your day-to-day basis?
So I work for a company called Lero, and basically it's an engineering, architecture company, project management, construction management. We don't do construction, but we do the management, all those things. And we have a disaster business, disaster recovery business. And one of the reasons I joined is to build a more resilient nation, right? And because if you don't, invest in pre-disaster initiatives like BRIC, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, a new program at FEMA, or just make investments in trying to make the next disaster a little less impactful to your neighborhood or to your state or to your town or your city, then we get into this cycle. So how do you promote best practice? For instance, building codes, right? In order to have a more resilient home, right? Just a simple concept. You have a more resilient home, you have to have a design, and you have to build it to a code that can withstand the hazards where you live. So whether you live on the coast, you live in earthquake country, you live in flooding, a flooding section of the country, what can you do to make your house more resilient? Retrofit it, because that's where it all starts, right? If you can if every homeowner in this example just did a couple things that make their home more resilient, buy flood insurance, for instance, to give your family a little more insurance when the bad day comes, then I think we would all be better off as a nation, right? And right? The cost of disasters, the intensity of disasters, the continued cycle of disasters that we've been in for the past probably 20 years. At some point, it becomes unsustainable, right? When is that next disaster that's so big that we can't write, the federal government, they can't write the check for it. So I think a lot of smart people have done a lot of work to say, hey, let's make these investments in disaster resilience, risk reduction ahead of time, because we know we're going to spend, 20 times the amount when the disaster happens. So let's get smarter. So again, I think that's where my head is. That's where my effort has been, is, how do we become a more resilient nation? And it's a big word, right? It sounds really great to say, but actually doing it is really hard.
Yeah, I would think that may be a more daunting task than what you were dealing with at FEMA. And the reason I say that is all the effort that goes into from the builders lobbying to keep codes lower in Mexico Beach, which we featured in our film, I think the wind rating for building houses was 130 miles an hour before Hurricane Michael. So they raised it to 140, but they were hit by a Category 5 hurricane. So you already know that a bigger storm can hit, yet they didn't rebuild to survive that. Why does that happen?
Because we love status quo in this country, right? We don't want to be upset by new rules, new regulations. And again, I think it goes back to human nature. We just want, I think most people just want to live their life the way they've been living it. And they don't want to, any added heartache or expense in doing anything different. But I started my life as a local emergency manager. And, I know you've heard the saying that all, disasters, start and end locally. And it's absolutely true. And so, the federal government is not going to has no authority to mandate local building codes. It has to start at the very, very bottom of the pyramid, right? And if you can have strong building codes, you can convince your city council, your town council that it's in the best interest of your community economically, right? Life and death, property preservation. If you can convince people that it's the right thing to do, then they'll do it. And Mexico Beach is really a great example, right? They probably had some of the worst or lowest building codes in the nation. And I think now, if you went back now, you would find out that they probably have some of the strongest building codes in the country, only because they know how bad it can be, right? They've been beat down by a hurricane that changed their way of life, and now they've seen the light. The tough thing that I think everyone struggles with is they think, hey, this is never going to happen to me. It only happens to people on TV. It doesn't happen here. I'm not sure why you want me to do this at maybe at some expense to me. So you have to really try to convince people, hey, it is in your best interest. It's in your community's interest to make these small investments so you can go on and live your life the way you want to, right? But there's some give and take in that. And again, I think like 65% of counties, cities, and towns don't have a modern building code. And why is that? I mean, I don't necessarily know, but you need to keep the pressure on your local elected officials to change those things.
But in the case of Mexico Beach, wouldn't it have made sense to say, let's take South Florida's building standards. Let's build to withstand a Category 5 hurricane, as opposed to a Category 3, maybe a 4. Why? So that was a perfect example. It's like with what they went through there, it was one of the most unbelievable scenes I've ever seen, with all the destruction and the people's lives that were turned upside down. And that's not even calculated in the cost of damage, is how your life is disrupted and how vulnerable you are after a disaster. So if ever there was a situation where they could have built back to a higher code, that seems like it should have been it.
Well, I mean, I think it's lack of imagination on a lot of people's part. So you've been down there, and I've been down there to Mexico Beach, and you've seen the pictures of before. It's a, wonderful place to have a beach home right on the water, small community, right? Very tight knit. A lot of old families down there that passed on some of those homes generation to generation. And then you go back after, and it's nothing but flat concrete pads. Like, there's no homes down there. And so how could you have convinced the homeowners pre-hurricane to, like, hey, this is what your community is going to look like if you don't do anything? So I mean, how do you get people to like see that vision and take action? It takes a lot of work. Some people down there, I mean, there weren't many homes that withstood the hurricane, but there were some homes down there that built a code. They were elevated off the ground, or they had reinforced concrete that allowed that home to stand. And you look around, and it's like 99% of the homes are gone. There's a couple down there that took action. Well, imagine if that was the other way around, right? Mexico Beach would, they would have recovered in a matter of weeks if that was the case.
Yeah, and so I don't understand it. I think they could have built back to a higher standard. I fear for what would happen if they got hit by another one. And if we look at Louisiana, what was it? Last year, it was 2 years ago, they got hit by 4 hurricanes.
Yeah, Lake Charles and surrounding parishes there really took a beating from Laura, Delta. I've lost track. I think I was in Louisiana so much I got to pay taxes last year on all my visits down there. But yeah, yeah, it's human nature, and what's the trick to overcome human nature? I don't know. If I figured it out, then I'd be a hero. But it just takes pressure, and it really starts. I think it starts with building codes, right? That if you can change building codes, then you can actually build to a more resilient state, and it doesn't cost that much more. I mean, I'm looking at some of the stats. If you build like a $300,000 house, 1.5% of that total, $5,000 is dedicated to more resilient building, hurricane straps, and all those kind of things. It's not expensive, but you just have to realize that you need to do that because it's in your best interest, your family's interest, your community's interest.
Yeah, and I think guys like you that are experts in the field and people that I read the stuff that they post online, I go, well, these guys understand it because they're doing it every day. But we were in Moore, Oklahoma, where it took 4 or 5 major tornadoes for them to finally change the building code there. I was amazed by how many people there did not have a storm cellar. So we went around trying to find out how much they cost, and it ended up you could get one for $3,500. You could finance it with very low interest. Yet a very small percentage of the population had it. Why do you think that is? Because if I lived in Oklahoma, that would be a must-have. You see what happens there and the damage that tornadoes. So they did the right thing. They finally changed the building code, and it has saved structures. But people still don't seem to take it as seriously as they should.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes, just the human nature, right? It's not going to happen, right? These things only happen to other people. And it hasn't happened, let's say that you're 65 years old, you've been living on the planet for 65 years in that community, and maybe it's happened a couple times, never happened to you directly. And you just say, well, it's not, the odds are it's not going to happen. And I'm just going to try to beat the odds while I'm here on the planet. And in some cases that may work for you. In other cases, not so much, right? Because you've seen the devastation across the country, whether it's from a tornado or flooding or wildfire. It will change your life forever, right? It will completely change your life forever. And I'm not sure people realize that. And just to pound on some of the things that are head scratchers. I went to flooding in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a couple of years ago. And really nice neighborhood, water, on the river, and it flooded, and it probably flooded there before, but not like this. And so you walk around the neighborhood, and houses are completely gutted. All their belongings are out on the front lawn, right? It's all going to the landfill. And then you start talking to people about, hey, how do you have flood insurance? No. Okay, so that means you're not getting anything from the federal government. The National Flood Insurance Program. You're not getting any money from the federal government to help you, rebuild your house, because homeowners insurance doesn't cover you for that kind of flood. And then you run into people that say, well, I don't even have homeowners insurance. Like the house was passed down to me. So I have no flood insurance. I have no homeowners insurance. And I'm not really sure what to do. Right. And this is like a middle-class neighborhood. This is just like middle-class America. And then you have to scratch your head about how could you allow that to happen, right? But as head of family, how can you allow home insurance to lapse on your structure that was at risk of flooding, right? Because again, you're not, most likely, maybe you get back in that house with the help of friends and family, but maybe you have to move into something subpar, right? So if you can have that vision of what it can look like, then maybe you'll do something different. And again, I think that's the story you have to keep telling, right?
Yeah, I mean, I that's one of the things I was talking to the folks at FEMA about is I think that should be the driving message. And if it already is, excuse me for not having seen it marketed places, but the pre-disaster preparation, I think, is where a lot of the attention should be. And when we were in Malibu, California, after the big fire there were people that had old cars that were valuable collector's cars, but they weren't running, so they didn't have them insured. Yeah. Coin collections, a lot of things in their houses. And those are the things, insurance might not even be able to replace them, but at least you would get something. But I think people go, nah, I spent the money last year, but we didn't have anything bad happen, so I'm not going to spend it this year.
I wish I could take people to disasters, right? Like the average American citizen, right? And like live, like take them to their that disaster. And you mentioned fires. I was up in I forget what neighborhood it was, but touring neighborhoods in California after one of the fires in
Paradise.
Paradise, and then there was another community that we went to. Yeah, Paradise, unbelievable, right? But we were walking through this neighborhood, and there was a fire department. So the whole neighborhood is burnt down. The only thing that survived those fires are like gas grills and bicycles and things that are made out of metal, cars, right? Even cars don't survive that well. And there's a homeowner who is, with the help of some local firefighters, is sifting. They have these little square wooden trays with wire in the bottom of it, and they're sifting through, shovelful at a time, their entire household to try to find something like a family memento, right? Whether it's rings or a watch or something. But essentially, everything else in that home, right, from the roof to the cellar, is ash. There is nothing left of your life, and you're trying to sift through tons and tons of debris to find, hopefully find that memento maybe that your grandmother gave you. It will crush you, right? If you were there doing it. So if you could take an American taxpayer in the moment to go see that, we would change the way we look at disasters and preparing for disasters.
Well, that's why that's why I'm trying to get more people to see my film, because we give them story after story. There's a family in Malibu that they had 4 fireproof safes that melted during the fire and ruined everything. The only thing that survived on their lot was a pizza oven that they had imported from Italy. And the woman said, I wish I had kept my jewelry in the pizza oven. It might have survived, but it's heartbreaking. And then some people go, well, they're rich, they can afford it. No, nobody can afford that. The things you lose, you can never get back. It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah. You walk away with nothing. I mean, you walk away with the concrete foundation. That's all that you have. And then good luck building. Have you been to some of those communities like Paradise, Santa Rosa, building back after a fire or a major disaster? It is a long haul if you're a homeowner, right? It will break your spirit.
So what people found out in Malibu was, because the code had evolved over the years, you could only build back the exact footprint of your house if you wanted to start right away. If not, you had to go through the whole permitting process. So if you wanted to get that view, or you wanted to have your house facing a certain way, it wasn't a slam dunk. You could get away with that. Yeah.
I mean, if you could only inject people with some of that, right? As a vaccine against, not taking action, we'd be better. But it takes all of us beating the drum to get that through people's heads.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very hard to get people to get out of that way of thinking. And another thing they don't think about too is, after the disaster, all the lowlifes that come in and then rip them off and take advantage of them. And we saw numerous examples of that in Panama City and Mexico Beach, where $10,000 to throw a tarp on your roof, or assign your insurance benefits over to us and we'll make sure your job gets done. And then they disappear. One guy ended up in jail who was actually showing us around. I mean, this just brings out the low of the low.
Yeah, it is heartbreaking, right? So you're paying $10,000 for a blue roof, where the Army Corps of Engineers will do it for free. So like, how did that happen? How come you didn't know about free roofs, right? Or a program to keep you safe, through your local community, to make sure that every contractor has a license that comes in, right? There's some really proactive communities out there, but you're right. You're already bent and broken from the disaster, and now people come in to take further advantage of you and set you further behind. So listen, this is I think if we had an answer for all of it, we wouldn't be talking today. And it takes just again, beating the drum about what you can do pre-disaster to make yourself more resilient, and how to keep yourself safe should a disaster happen, and get back to whatever that new normal is quicker. And the speed, the intensity, of disasters just keeps coming and coming and coming, and in some cases it's hard to catch up. I mean, and I'm speaking for FEMA, right? Hundreds and hundreds of disasters pile up, and recovery is a long, grinding path for everyone, to include the federal government, right down to the homeowner.
Yeah, I wish there was a way that could be incorporated into the statistics of a disaster, is the pain and suffering after the disaster, because people's lives, the media leaves to go on to the next story.
Yeah.
And then those people are living in that hell for years.
Yeah. There are disasters on the books today, dating as far, so federal disasters, probably dating as far back as the year 2000. Still, I remember as the FEMA administrator, I was approving expenditures for Katrina, and Katrina was 2004, and we're still spending money on Katrina, right? And so let's do the math on how many disasters we've had since 2004. I don't even know what the number is, right? But it's hundreds, maybe even 1,000 of federal declared disasters, and we're still paying for all those. Again, it becomes unsustainable, and so where's the balance between what the federal government can do for an individual and what an individual can do for him or herself, right? So again, all starts locally. Champion those building codes and make sure that, if you have to retrofit a house or you're building a new house, that you're building to standards, to keep your family safe. And that's essentially what it is, right? How do you keep your family safe and out of harm's way? Well, it's, in this case, we're talking about natural disasters. This is about building codes and building to standard or above standard.
Yeah, that was the primary message in our film, is it really starts from the bottom up, that every homeowner needs to be their own best advocate, because truly nobody's looking out after you. Your builder is counting nickels when he builds your house. And unless you ask for specific things, I don't think they're going to do them. And if they proudly strut and say, we build to code, you need to check what the code is and see if the code's even enough where you live.
Yeah. And so, I think, I wrote this post a couple of weeks ago about, building standards. And it came to me one day because I'm about to build a new house for myself. And, wouldn't it be embarrassing, right? Just like personally embarrassing for the former FEMA administrator's house for the roof to blow off, right? That would be that would be personally and professionally embarrassing for me. And then, so I said, "Ooh, let me make sure that when the builder gives me all the specs, that he has all these things that, building, straps and connectors and tie, all those things that don't cost a lot of money, but will make my new home, more resilient. Am I getting impact resistant glass in my house, right? Is that part of my new build?" So there's a lot of things. So it made me wonder, like, a lot of people are either retrofitting and building a house. So let me help them. Let me help myself, right? Because I've seen how bad it can be. But let me help some others by pointing out some things that are, cheap to do, easy to do, and with some forethought. It doesn't really add too much money to, again, whether you're building a new house or retrofitting a new house, or looking to buy a new house, to see if those things are part of that build. So there's lots of resources out there that you can go to and get free help from.
Did the builder run when he saw you coming, knowing that he's going to have somebody watching him who actually knows what they're doing?
I probably haven't. I don't have a builder yet, right? Okay. So I'm still in the planning process. But I'm sure when I lay out all my demands, I'm sure the builder will have to swallow hard a few times.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to give an expert like you one piece of advice, only because I've gotten kind of screwed every time I build or buy a house, is you got to watch those guys every second.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, just every second. So in your opinion, when we take the problem that we've been talking about, it's that all these disasters, all this rebuilding and it keeps happening again and again. How do we make it better?
Well, I mean, so the first thing, and I'll just talk about some just basic things that anyone can do today. I forget the exact stat, but 95% of the counties in America have flooded in the past year or so, right? So that's it floods everywhere. So just because you don't live next to the ocean or live next to a lake or a river, doesn't mean that you can't flood. Look at Hurricane Harvey in Houston, right? How widespread that flooding was, and the impact that it did, right? Those people that got flooded that were far away from the flood zone never had an idea that it could flood. And so, get flood insurance. It's the average premium is like $700 a year. And I know for some that may be a hard thing to do, but you're trying to protect your investment, right? You have to have car insurance, right? So you have to have a car to get, to work and do all those things that we all do. So, protect that investment of your house, your greatest investment. It may cost you a little bit of money, but hopefully it keeps you in your house and again gets you back to normal quicker. I think the other thing is you have to educate yourself about what's around you. What are the risks where I live, and how do I reduce those risks and mitigate those risks so I'm ready for the next thing that happens. A lot of these things are not high cost kinds of things, but it really is awareness and taking the initiative to again protect yourself and your family from these things that will happen, right? And then you have to believe that it can happen to me, right? It can happen to me, and I need to take action.
Yeah, I mean I think that's so well said, is that understanding what the risks are where you're buying that house, instead of getting wooed by the bells and whistles, the granite countertops. Maybe they have some nice special carpeting in there, or they painted recently, but it's the structural things about your house. Where could that flooding come from? Flood insurance isn't that expensive if you don't live in a flood zone.
Yeah,
I just think that people are reluctant to do this, especially in a competitive real estate market, where you feel like if you are too questioning and demanding, they're just going to go on to the next guy.
Yeah. And again, now these stories come back because I love, as a FEMA administrator, go out and talk to people. And I visited this, and I'm not going to name the state or the locale, but I talked to a woman who lived right on a lake, like on a lake that flooded, and it had just flooded. And I asked her, "Hey, do you have flood insurance?" Nope. I said, will you get flood insurance for the next storm or next flood? Nope. Why? Because I don't need it. Some of the logic in it, I'm not sure what the logic was, that I've been flooded at least once. I had to pay for whatever damages happened in the first flooding. I could get flood insurance that cover me to a much greater degree, but I'm still not going to do it, right? Whether it was I don't trust the program, I don't trust the government, I don't believe in insurance. I don't know what it was, but it is kind of a head scratcher where it just happened to you, right? It happened to you and your neighbors, and you still refuse to do things that are in your best interest. And I don't think it was a matter of like how much it costs, right? This is a pretty well-to-do neighborhood, but I don't know. Some things are baffling to me sometimes. About it seems really obvious about what actions you should take to protect yourself and your family, and some people just refuse to do it. I don't know why. Others do, but there's a majority out there that just won't do it.
Yeah, I don't understand that at all. Why people don't? It's their biggest investment, yet they probably put more money into things that completely are irrelevant in their lives. Yeah. When I lived in San Antonio, Texas, we had the effects of a hurricane, a lot of rain in 1998, and people that lived 4 or 5 miles from a river were flooded because of how high the water came up. And I just don't think people think about that. They don't look at a map and go, "Hey, there's a dam 5 miles up the road from me. What if that breaks?"
Yeah,
we just don't think.
Yeah, and the federal system is at odds with itself, right? It really is. We don't really have a law or a policy about repetitive, so I'll pick repetitive flooding or repetitive disasters. I live in a flood zone. I get flooded. FEMA comes. I get some money to build back my house or life better. I stay where I am. Nothing changes with local code. It floods again. Same cycle, right? I get money from the federal government. It floods again. I get money from the federal government. So we're not, speaking on from the federal FEMA side, we're not helping ourselves with some of these programs that just logically don't make any sense. But again, if you're a local elected leader or a congressman or senator telling your constituents that, hey, by the way, FEMA's not going to cover you anymore. Maybe it's a bridge too far for elected officials to say that, right? To actually disincentivize some of the things that we do, right? So, we have I think the federal government has some things to do to kind of change that dynamic. But if hey, FEMA will be here or the federal government will be here to kind of, give me money or give me resources and I can stay right where I am, then maybe that's the easiest path for people. But we need to fix some things, I think, at the federal level to kind of change that dynamic.
Yeah, a great neighborhood to look at. I live in Tampa, Florida, and so they're rebuilding a lot of houses. So a lot of older houses that are at ground, sea level elevation, and flood levels 10 feet. And so you see a brand new house way up in the air, and then houses next to it that are going to get flooded. And you just want to wonder, do these people have flood insurance? Are they thinking about it? Are they saying, well, then that'll be our indication to finally rebuild? Also, a lot of people putting wood on the second floor in an area that's prone to hurricanes. There's apartment buildings built down the road from us that are all built out of wood. Yeah. It's like, are they not hearing the message?
It's a head scratcher sometimes, right?
Yeah. Could
you build out of more weather resistant material like concrete, reinforced concrete, or a combination, or better engineering standards to make that thing survive? I don't know. Maybe it's cheaper to let it, let insurance cover it and rebuild it. Maybe it's cheaper that way. I don't know, but logically, I think to me and you and most people, it makes no sense.
Yeah, we know some people whose house was flooded a few years ago from, I think it was a tropical storm that hit this area. So they're rebuilding, and I walked by there the other day, and they're doing the second floor wood. And you can see how they kind of have it bracketed on there. But I was explaining to my wife that, what are they doing? They know that this is a bullseye for a hurricane, and it leaves me scratching my head. Anyway, the reason that I found you, I had seen you on TV back in 2020, but you posted this article on LinkedIn. It was a post that gave a bunch of resources for people that I just thought was fantastic because it covered earthquakes, high wind, designing roofs, flood resistant. What motivated you to do that?
Yeah, I think so. I've always been like a pro building code, right? Modern building code, right? From as far back when I was a local, especially at FEMA, seeing the impact of a disaster on a community that has no building codes, right? It's sad and it's completely avoidable if you took some action. And then again, like I said, I'm about to build a new home, and it's like, oh, I need to make sure that I'm doing all the right things, because I know I can. In my head, right? I've been to floods, hurricanes, fires, you name it. I've been to all of them, earthquakes. And I see what happens to communities, to a home that's improperly built, engineered, and more importantly, it's really not the structure itself. It's what happens to the people that live inside of it, right? Does my wife want to live in a shelter for 6 months? It's not happening, right? My wife is not going to put up with that. My family's not going to put up with it. I don't want to do it because I've seen it. So what can I do now? And so that's the kind of motivating me, because I'm actually in the process of doing it. And I kind of want to make sure that I share all those resources out with people that may be in the same circumstance or thinking about doing it, or they could share that out with people that are doing it. But again, all free resources that are out there available from both the federal government and from the private sector who have an interest in all this. Flash is out there. Fortified Homes is out there. You can find all those things online, and again, free. And look at those specs, hand them to your builder, and say, "Are you building? Are you building this for me? When I build a new home or retrofit a new home, are you doing all these things that we should be doing?" And if the answer is no, then you need to take a serious look at specs and the end result. You don't want to get yourself in a jackpot when it's avoidable for a small amount of money.
I think let me answer for them right now. And the answer in most cases is probably no. And you have to demand it. When we were in Moore, Oklahoma, the builder we interviewed, when they changed the building code, I think it added, they said $1.50 per square foot to the cost of construction, which she said was roughly adding granite countertops. And I said, what would people have chosen if they just had the choice between granite countertops or the higher code? And he said most people would choose the granite countertops.
Yeah.
And that tells you everything you need to know. It's like we're our own worst enemies as home buyers because we don't demand more. We let them get away with it. And as long as we don't hold them accountable, they will continue to get away with it.
Yeah, and I agree. But again, I think it all starts with education. If you can arm people with that information and kind of make them see the light, then maybe they'll make a different choice, right? Maybe they'll get a lower grade counter and do the other thing, or just say that investment of 1.5% of the total cost of the house. I'm going to make that investment to make sure I can stay in the house, without interruption should a disaster occur. I mean, that's kind of it. So education, I think, is key. Making people aware of what's out there, what they can do on their own. So whether or not you have strong building codes right in your community doesn't really matter. If you're educated, you're made aware, you have the resources, you can build to whatever standard you want to build. Of course, it costs a little bit more money, but don't let the lack of building codes determine your future, right? You should arm yourself with good information and demand, whether you're doing a retrofit or building a new house or buying a new house, that these things are part of the future of your life, and more importantly, the future of your family, right? Because it's not necessarily about the building; it's really about your family, right? The living people that are going to endure the pain and suffering that will come with bad building codes.
Yeah, I mean, I encourage everybody to watch. I hate to plug my own film during your segment, but to watch The Last House Standing and to see just how bad it is for people after a disaster. And I certainly want to follow up with you and see how your house comes out, because you could kind of be like the heart surgeon that you see eating the big fatty steak, smoking the cigar, and you're going, wait a second, he should know better.
Yeah.
We know you should know better.
No, I know now. So now, like I'm really motivated now to make sure it all gets done right.
Yeah,
maybe I'll chronicle my house build and demonstrate all the things that I invested in.
I think you should.
Yeah. So and honestly, is it going to cost me more money? Yeah, it will. But listen, it's from what I've seen in my life, it's the amount of money is inconsequential to the results that you will endure if you don't make that investment. And again, I think that if you get people to see that, right, people would spend that money without a blink of an eye.
Yeah, the worst part of making our film is just seeing the pain in those people's faces that are just steamrolled by a disaster. It's like there's that glazed look. You've probably seen it way more than I ever will. Yeah. It's unbelievable.
It's heartbreaking, right? It's hot because that I'm getting back into my air-conditioned car and I'm going to my air-conditioned hotel and I'm going to get on a plane and go back to my home, right? That's still standing. And I have running water, I have air conditioning, I have electricity, I have all those things, and you're leaving those people behind. It is gut wrenching, right? So I think back to my earlier point, if I could just take those people that haven't been impacted by disasters and transport them real time into the shoes of a disaster survivor while they're shoveling out a shovel at a time, looking for their life mementos, you would change the way we look at disasters in this country. I mean, I don't know how we can do that, but it really is quite important that people understand what's at risk.
Yeah, I think it's going to take a lot, and and even we see it when in the rebuilds. I don't think they're doing enough, and it's scary. It's scary to see, and it unfortunately it's going to keep happening. So if people want to get in touch with you and get more information about you, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
You can just I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not on Twitter. I gave that up. I'm not on Facebook. Never was. So I'm a LinkedIn kind of guy. My contact information is in there. You can either send me an email or direct message me. Feel free. I'll try to be helpful where I can.
Awesome. And I'm going to put all those resources that you had in your article in the show notes for this podcast,
Great.
because I think it's huge for people to be able to click to Fortified, to be able to go to all these different resources. And that was a great job putting that out there. Pete, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks, George.
And best of luck with your house.
I will. Now I'm going to have to chronicle the whole thing now. Now you got me thinking.
That could be a documentary film right there. That would be worth watching.
It could be. It could be.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for joining me for today's podcast. If you enjoyed what you were listening to, please share the link with your friends so they can become listeners too. And if you have any questions or comments, there's a contact form on our website, tellashowtomakeitbetter.com. You can give me your thoughts about what you were listening to or suggestions for guests for future programs. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.